Hi everyone, welcome. Sorry, I think it's the second time you're seeing me. I'm going to go through QC and kind of look at the practicality in terms of identifying errors within IQC, how we investigate that, and so on. Let me just put that on you can see it. Fab. So we're going to go through, understand how to interpret our QC results, identify common analytical errors, recognize trends and shifts in the data, and we're going to apply some root cause analysis to QC failures, and then implement some corrective actions and preventive actions. So IQC, what is it? So it's to monitor consistency and reliability of lab results. It ensures results are accurate and reproducible, and we use it to detect error before it impacts patient results. It's also a critical part of daily lab workflow. So you can't really process any assays or lab tests without running a QC and making sure the quality assurance is robust before running patient samples. So interpreting IQC results. So the key considerations are comparing results against the control limits. So it's something that you either get from manufacturer or you kind of put together yourself in the data format, and then you have the mean, which is the true value in which you're measuring your results against. And then you assess whether that value falls in with an acceptable range, which is either given by the manufacturer or you concluded yourself that is your limits. And then you identify random variation, systematic errors, and review performance over time. So when we go through types of analytical errors, so we've got random errors. Those are acceptable, and these fluctuation errors. So they are when your QC falls outside the acceptable limits. And that often happens around 5% of the time. And it affects precision if it's fluctuation too much on one side or the other. So that needs to be checked in terms of analytical variance or variation, sorry. And then we have systematic errors, consistent deviation from the value or the true value, and it affects accuracy. And then we have common causes are instrument issues, reagent instability, operator error, but there are more within that. So we can have a look at it. So when you're talking about a graph, we're using the Levi-Jennings charts in hematology mainly, but you can use it in chemistry. This is showing the chemistry test. This was taken from the Westgard Rule website. So you have values, which are red, and that's your unacceptable values if your QC results goes outside that. And then you have a set limit of around 2SD, which is your warning limits. And then your green is your acceptable mean value. So Levi-Jennings is kind of visual tool to monitor the QC data over time, and it helps detect trend and shifts. Westgard Rule is the application of those data analysis statistical rules to identify out of control results. And it also is used to improve decision making and when to accept or reject runs. So recognizing trends, so trends and shifts. So trends are gradual increase or decrease over time. So if your QCs is shifting up, it hasn't gone outside the acceptable or the warning value, but it's shifting up multiple points, it's still showing you some sort of a trend that you need to look at or investigate. Or you can have a sudden shift in the mean value. You expect that 5% of the time of applying that QC, but not more than that. And then we're looking at why actually these gradual changes or sudden changes matter, and it's to indicate any potential system issues, and it helps us prevent reporting the wrong results to patients. So this is again from the Westgard website. So it's just the simplistic graphs of what it looks like when you're looking at QCs. What other violations mean? So when you're looking at a 1SD value that's gone up the 2SD marker, which is the warning yellow, you're looking at interpretation of saying that's an early warning sign, and you will investigate but not reject the results. where if you can see where the 3SD, your QC mark has gone outside the 3SD, then that is an error in which you need to reject before running patient samples. If your QC is processed within the run, so you kind of run your QC in the morning, that was acceptable, and then you run it at lunchtime and it fails outside once, that's a random. But if it does again, then you need to stop the run and you need to actually check the patient samples are not impacted, because that could indicate systematic error within your instrument. And then the third one is that where you have two results on the warning value of 2SD limit consecutively, then you're looking at can indicate a shift, and that can also be a systematic error. So you need to make sure when you repeat that QC, it comes in closer to the mean. If it doesn't, then you need to investigate and reject. Another pattern is when you have a QC that is on the negative 2SD, but then on the next round it goes on to the positive 2SD. That is a random because it kind of shifts from one point to the other. So you won't kind of reject that, but I'll show you a table in a minute on what to do in terms of action. So these are the patterns that we need to, I think somebody else has joined in Teams. So these are the patterns we need to look out
I'm
for.
sorting, thanks, Nora.
Sorry. Is what does it mean when you have a consistent shift? What does it mean when you have a random shift? And what does it mean, for example, where you have these 10 results all outside on one side of your mean value? If it started that way, then you need to make sure that when you did your QC acceptance, so you run your QC acceptance over a period of time to assess where that QC is running within the value that is given by the manufacturers, and then your acceptance is based on that. So you will change your acceptance value according to that. But if it's not running, if it's running like a up and down oscillating around the mean, and then it all of a sudden goes above the mean consecutively, then that is a clear shift in terms of issue with your process or your instrument. And this is just a summary table just to kind of have what the error patterns are and what the actions are. So good, really random, good scatter would be one that oscillates around the mean. It often stays within your warning. It doesn't go outside that too often consecutively, and it occasionally goes as a random error of the 3SD or the 4SD, but that should only be about 5% of the time. So if that happens, you accept the QC. If you have a 3SD on one occasion, that is a random, so you reject, but you don't need to do anything about it because you expect it to happen 5% of the time. If it's happening every day or every other day, then you need to question that because it shouldn't be happening that frequent. Where if you had a one 2SD, which would be your warning twice, then you will reject that sample as well because it would mean systematic error on your instrument. So what I'm thinking about is that when you're running your daily QC, you're also doing trending over time. That trend in itself will also show you any patterns of shift or drift. And you should also be looking at your CV of your QC, how your QC is performing over a period of a week. And that will tell you what are the performance. Is the performance a drift, or is it trend in the above the mean or below the mean? So it's really important to utilize all of those systems in assuring your quality before you run patient samples, while you're running patient samples, because the EQA will not pick up what's happening week to week. So what do we do then when things go wrong? So if you have your QCs failed and you suspect any either system issue or issues going on with your QC material or your reagents, you identify what went wrong, so you investigate. You focus on kind of when you investigate and you actually utilize a structural approach, so either the 5 whys or fishbone analysis, and you also focus on system-wide investigation. You don't focus on individuals. And this is what an example of system-wide investigation using fishbone analysis. So you look at all the aspects that are associated with that QC with regards to the method itself, the material you're using, the personnel, the different personnels that are performing that task, environment, measurement, QMS, and there's also other things we'll look at down in a minute. So when you're looking at methods, you're looking at, is your process complex? Is your SOP on a risk-based approach? So are your methodology processes risk assessed? The staff know what are the pitfalls when they're doing that task? Is it clear and up to date? You're looking at what are the frequency of your QCs? Are that based on the volume of work you're running in a day? Because if you're running hundreds or thousands of patient sample on your FBC analyzers, you need to make sure you have a frequent QC intervals during the day to pick up any analytical error or issue with the instrument before impact samples. And then you're looking at things like improper calibration. When was the instrument calibrated? If you have to calibrate it and that data is accessible to you, it's important to look at that data and make sure what your QC levels are telling you also reflects that whether you need to actually revisit that calibration. Are the wrong rules applied? So when you're doing your, for example, reagent acceptance, sometimes you're using calculation yourselves in which you're setting your acceptable values, perhaps closer to your mean on the data you collected yourself, which are not based on the manufacturer. So you need to make sure that is correct when you apply it to your instrument. And then when you're thinking about materials, you are looking at things like the reagent expired, what are the lot-to-lot variations? So you can go back to your acceptance or QC acceptance data to make sure where your QC was running in that lot that you're running at that point. Is there any improper storages? And that's really important because people often take the QC material out of the fridge. They run that and they leave it out, and the stability deteriorates depending on how long you leave it in a temperature that is not that the QC material shouldn't be stored in the first place. So if you're running it, you bring up the wrong temperature, you run it on the instrument, and then you put it back into the storage temperature of 4 or whatever the suggested manufacturer is. Is the reagents or the QC itself contaminated? You need to look at that and consider that. I'll come back to personnel, but then also the environment, because instruments do have a analytical performance temperature. So you need to make sure you know what your instrument temperature performance is, because that can impact your QCs, and it can also impact the patient samples that you are storing in that area. So things like temperature monitoring and fluctuation really is important. And when you talk about measurement, you're talking about in terms of the data entry, incorrect QC charting. So you're looking at how you're measuring your QC, misinterpretation of trends. So when you're doing the trends, is it correct? Is the correct values applied? And your software, what kind of software you're using, is it easily accessed and people can kind of play around and change the setting. And then personnel, in terms of inadequate training. So are the staff trained how to troubleshoot? Do they understand the human factors associated with? So do they understand all of these things that could contribute a failure to the QC and how they investigate that? Can they follow the SOP? Is it clear, as we said, and concise, that is easy to follow by staff? We already talked about calculation errors. When you're doing the calculation for your QC acceptance, you make sure that it's done correctly and checked by an independent individual who's also trained to understand what those data mean, because if you enter that data, it can impact your QC values. And then incorrect QC interpretation. Do they know how to interpret QC? Do they know how to identify trends such as shift and biases within your QC over time? And then we have a QMS, so the quality management system in place should be also checking those processes. So you should be auditing the process itself to identify any gaps in all of these areas within your audit schedule. You should also be investigation. So any errors that you identify that significant should be logged into your QMS system. So we can identify trends on how many times these things are happening. If it's difficult, I see lots of labs, they often have a spreadsheet where they log minor errors. So if there's nothing that needs to be investigated, they will often also log there to check how many times these are happening, whether it's actually, it needs to be investigated further, and then it's raised in your QMS system. So these are just extra things to consider when you're investigating. So improper handling as well is really important. I've already mentioned in terms of removing your QC from the fridge and leaving it on the desk somewhere after you run them. So incorrect reconstitution of your control, so the wrong volume. We need to make sure staff are trained to make sure how they actually make that sample, not just how to store it. Mixing it, because some QCs will require you mixing every time you're running it. Some of the instrument do mix, but some of the sample pathways that you have to run the sample manually, so you have to mix it yourself. The frequent freeze and thaw. So if your sample requires freezing, it doesn't often apply to routine hematology, but it does apply to some assays, such as coag. It means that you've got to refreeze in some of your QCs and thawing it, that can impact it. And they can lead all to a QC drift and random errors if your QC isn't treated that way, or you're not checking those things. We already talked about contamination, calibration, the material you're using for calibration, wrong calibrator values. If you're accepting or using the wrong lot when you're calibrating it, because sometimes calibration expire really quickly for some of the instrument. So you need to make sure that you check all of that before you use the calibration material to set your values on the instrument. If you're using a calibration outdated factors, sometimes the factors you apply to your QCs are given with the calibration sheet, so you make sure the lot number is the same, and you are applying the reason calibration factors to your instrument when you calibrate it. Other bits are just a malfunction of the instrument itself. So things like, and this is just because I worked in hematology, examples within hematology is kind of the blocked apertures or the flow cells. The vacuum issues used to be quite a big one. Laser optical detection issues. So all of those can kind of interfere with your readings, or poor maintenance of the instrument. So if your instrument doesn't have its yearly maintenance, or it's missed its daily or weekly cleaning, that can kind of build a debris and impact your QC over time. So corrective actions then. So immediately we need to fix the problem and stop reporting results. And that is to identify, depending on when the QC failure is, if has there been any results impact, and we need to make sure that we check that before we continue with anything. Because if you had hundreds of results going out in the morning because your QC was fine, and in midday you repeated it twice and they're both out, you need to investigate those values. What are the level of the QC you're using, and how is that impacted the results that you've gone out in the patient? So you put on hold and stop reporting until you complete the investigation and you are assured the results that have gone out to patient was correct, and you don't need to recall anything and rerun. And then you consider other things such as the reagents, recalibration and repeating again, and see whether that resolves it. It all depends on really what you identify in your investigation, in what you focus on. So you fix what you identified, basically. If you identified something could be the cause, and there could be other factors that could impact it, you make sure you focus on what you think has caused it, and then you focus on what the contributing factors are after that if it's not resolved. And then you check patient results are not impacted, as we said at the beginning, to prevent reoccurrence and reduce the risk of reoccurrence. You improve the process, training, update the SOP. It's really important that you look at the whole system and not just focus on one thing, not just focus on the QC. I'll replace the QC and that will fix it. You need to identify when you open that QC, how long has it been on in the fridge in terms of use. Those kind of analysis was kind of pinpoint the correct corrective actions for you. And then you have to apply some ongoing monitoring, so trending either weekly and monthly, and then you discuss those data, what they look like in your lab meetings, to make sure that the whole lab or the team understand exactly what our trends are and how we move forward if there are any issues that we need to resolve or work on. So if you just look at the key takeaways then, so IQCs, we need IQC in everything we do because it ensures patient safety. So we need to make sure there are ways, whether it's a material we're using or there's other ways of running QCs, but the assays is in control before you run patient samples. And there is a review that data is correct before you run any patient sample on report. You can use obviously the live-igene and the Westcard together to make sure you identify and you set in yourself roles where you will reject, where you will investigate, and where you will accept. And you act early on those trends and failures. You make sure you record, investigate, discuss with your team at all times. I think that's about it. So that was really quite small. So I just wanted to I don't think we actually had the email suggested to talk about anything else, but we can discuss that and do that next time. But at this point, I just want to check if there's any questions or anything that I might have rushed that you want me to go through again.
Anybody got questions, things they want to talk about, discuss? Thank you, Nora, very much. You can see something in that's the feedback. There's lots of people here. Any questions, people? Please speak up.
Hello, Nora. Thank you so much. It is very simple and practical. But I'm asking, would you have like 1 or 2 examples that you can take us through how to analyze, how to troubleshoot? Maybe in case you have something, 1 or 2 example as a practical. Thank you. I'm not sure this can be available today or maybe we plan it next time.
Okay, so you want me to get like real examples of QC failures and how we approach that in investigation for
or
our
even
department?
Yes, how we check the CV percentage and how we analyze weekly or maybe every 2 weeks or monthly.
Okay, I can do that. No problem. I can do that for the next session to make sure I get real examples and we go through what was done on that. And I can get examples of what is done in the normal routine labs at the moment in terms of quality assurance. So all of the things that I don't know what is in place in your lab. So you might have to kind of talk me through that. But in the haematology lab that I used to work and the one that I was a quality manager and the existing labs that are now part of our organization, they do have to apply all of those things that we talked about. So your daily QCs, check in and make sure that's fine on a daily basis. And yes, trending, checking the analytical bias by doing your CV on a weekly basis, trending your QC over months, QC acceptance. So you have to accept your QC lot to lot. But I can put that together in terms of all the processes that is done, in a routine lab currently in our organization and talk through that. to see whether that would be helpful for you guys. I just wanted to ask a question on what is it now? What do you now do in terms of your IQC? How do you normally trend them? Do you trend them monthly, weekly, for the lots that you're using?
Okay,
Hi. So
Sorry.
yeah, anyone can go ahead, no problem.
hi, Dr. Sahar Kangwa here. Can I respond?
Yes, Kangwa, thank you.
So this is really dependent on each lab's uh, standard procedures, because each lab has got a different standard procedure depending on what type of samples they receive, or how many, or let me say how many samples they receive daily. So according to your procedures, you have to run QCs dependent on how many samples that you're running. And for the UTH procedures, specifically speaking to the UTH procedures, we mostly run our IQCs daily. I don't know if this answers your question. Thank you. I submit.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So for example, for routine hematology, for example, because you're running thousands of samples and routine chemistry, you would need to, in line with the current standards, you would need to establish a frequency in which you run your QC, which, yes, depends on the volume of the work. So if you've got, thousands of samples a day you're running, you might need to run morning, lunchtime, in the evening, and then just before you shut down your analyzer, so 4 times a day. But you need to justify that in a risk assessment. So you have to identify what are the things that you can identify if things go wrong. So if, for example, can you identify if your reagent is not working by your patient? So some analyzers will have a built-in systems which they calculate some parameters based on how many times those samples have run. So some labs can utilize that, but you have to justify why you're not running your QC frequent enough for the number of patient samples you're running on the instrument. So that works really well for hematology and to an extent for chemistry. Labs that run 100 samples a day, whatever, can get away with perhaps running it twice a day. But the routine main labs, depending on how many samples you're getting, you should be looking at least 3 to 4 times. The other thing that the UCAS assessment has identified in the labs is that most labs would run 3 times but would not run a QC before shutdown. So the question was then, how do you know the instruments or the samples you've run before shutdowns were right, giving the right results? Because the last time you ran your QC was 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and you've run probably 400 samples since then. So now labs have to justify, especially within routine hematology or routine labs, they have to justify the frequency of their QC to assure that the reports or the results that have gone out to patient have not been impacted by analytical problems or reagent problems. So it's really important that you consider the volume of work and the number of IQC you're running. And then the other things that you have to then look at, I don't know if you're doing measurement certainty within your department, is a UCAS requirement, so I'm assuming that's been done as well. But you have to make sure the application of that is also adequate to your quality assurance. And what I mean by that is that you're looking at your analytical imprecision or performance on a data you set, benchmark you set over 6 months or over a year. And that value should apply to when you're doing your imprecision on a weekly basis, and it should be lower than the biological variance, which is the biases you pick up within patient samples because they have diseases or other things. So it's really important when you're thinking about quality assurance, you look at all aspects, because every single activity will give you a data that then you can justify your method is working properly for patients. But yeah, I will pick that up next time to put real cases.
Thank you.
Anything else, everybody? I see there's lots of people here. You must have some other questions, lab staff.
Sorry, because I picked it. I thought I'll pick it in a simplistic way. So maybe it was too simple, the talk that I put together. So next time we can.
So if we have Noura back later in the year, if you don't have any questions, perhaps you could speak up and ask her for what you would like her to include next time, apart from the suggestion we already have. No.
Complete silence.
Type it in the chat if you don't want to speak.
I would say, also be good. We can always have a quick conversation on Zoom to kind of just discuss what you locally do, to see whether there are anything we can learn from you guys are doing, or anything that we do within our organization you can learn from us, to take away, and that are possible to do locally for your labs. So I'm open for that as well. So just contact me and let me know whether you want to just have a quick catch up before we do any talks.
I can suggest one of the point how to evaluate risk assessment, or how to go through risk assessment. This is one of the point I feel sometimes is not digested much for everyone. I know we have on the meeting now, like some people that they are very expert for quality management and quality assurance. And Mr. Bavana is here also. He can guide us and give us good direction. But sometimes here in Zambia, when we don't have a commercial quality control, we use a retained sample, which we have to run it every day for 5 times from the previous day. And we, like, it's already built on the Excel sheet to give us the CV percentage. And unless the CV percentage passed and everything passed, this is when we are allowed to use the machine. But we do this on a daily basis. We are many lab in UTH. So there is a children hospital lab, CDH or cancer disease hospital lab, main adult hospital, then women and the newborn. This make us each site, we have an average of about 300 to 400 sample a day in each lab. If I am wrong, guys, you can correct me. Your hands are on the machine more than me. Thank you.
That's really interesting. It's quite difficult to run patient sample as QC, and you can get away with that easily with some of the assays. I don't know whether is it routine hematology you use those patient samples for QCs, or is it for example, for antenatal or hemoglobinopathies?
No, we use a routine sample. Most likely, we pick up a normal, like a parameter within normal. This is mostly what we use, yes.
Okay.
But this is happen when we don't have commercial QC. Yeah.
So does that mean sometimes you're running the commercial QCs, and then when you no longer have that, you resort into patient sample
Yes.
as a QC? Okay, that's going to be quite difficult then, because the patient samples, you can't always get it right, the values. and it's a different material, so it's not going to trend the same way. You're
It's
going to
not
have
like we call it retained sample, means that we run it the day before, like or few hours before, and this is now we are comparing the result for previous result. So it's a retained quality control.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see what you mean. And you're running those samples across all of the instruments you have, or just
No, in our lab, yeah. But most of the time, yes, if we have more than one machine operating, we do this for all the machines that is operating in the same time. But sometimes we have only one machine that is operating. It all depends on the availability of reagent.
oh, okay. I see what you mean. I mean, that's a good practice because you're running a QC, but because you don't have sometimes a lot of QC to run it frequent times, you're using patient samples just to check the repeatability is there for the results for the patient samples. So that's another way you could probably utilize another quality assurance throughout the day and document that. And that's another data that you can trend by just checking the repeatability would be acceptable, but you can trend over time. The problem with IQC using patient sample at different days is that you're going to get different patient samples. So you're going to get what you had yesterday tested is not going to be the same tomorrow. So you just have to have it daily acceptance that your analyzer was operating fine at that time on that day when you do run the patient samples.
I can also add on to what Dr. Saha is saying. So basically, what we tend to do is that we run, so take for instance, today, the 17th, the sample, the QC check, we're going to use the samples that we ran yesterday on the 16th. So we do not use the same sample continuously. No, no, no. So we just pick the day, the previous samples that were run. So we'll compare the results from the previous tests of the previous day to today's, and then we run it 5 times. So we now have not the same, we have a tool, a carryover tool that we use. So we'll then infuse on this tool, it's an Excel spreadsheet. So we infuse in the results, and then now it will give us the basically like the minimum to tell you whether the machine has passed its daily QCs for that particular day or not.
Okay. I'm a little bit confused though. So do you run the commercial IQC on that day? Do you run it in the morning and then use the patient samples later on?
So this is in a situation where we do not have the commercial IQCs. So the commercial IQCs are not always readily available. When we do have them, then for that particular time period, we'll be running commercial IQCs. Then when we do not have, then we revert back. It's almost like our contingency plan. So our contingency plan in the scenario that we do not have commercial IQCs is that we use our patient samples as or we call them carryover samples.
Oh, okay. I got you now. So how do you trend on your graphs then when you run patient samples compared to when you run your commercial? You're not running, you're just doing it on a spreadsheet and accepting based on a benchmark acceptance on the patient sample. Is that what you're doing?
We're going to also be using the measurement of uncertainty because at least the machine has given you those measurements of certainty, basically. But then for commercial IQCs, we are using the Levy-Jennings charts to help you with that. But for the commercial IQCs, this is a tool that has been created and it calculates on your behalf. As you are entering the patient's parameters after you've run this back sample, it's going to now basically tabulate what the results are. So once it notices that you're a little bit off, it will tell you like, oh, you failed your QCs. Then maybe you have to repeat your QCs until the machine passes, or you troubleshoot to figure out why the machine is failing its QCs at that particular point.
Okay, so that's your commercial one. But for the patient ones, yeah, I think I'll have to see it, what this spreadsheet looks like. But it's fine. I don't know where that justification then needs to exist within a risk assessment when you don't have a commercial QC, that you're using patient samples, because patient samples don't behave same as the fixed material of the IQC. And the IQC, we use IQC for measurement certainty because it takes away all the biases that would exist within the patient sample. So if you're using a patient sample as a QC, you're gonna, and sometimes you're using as a contingency, then you've got to write up that in a risk assessment, I would say. I don't know if you've probably already done that.
Yeah. So basically that, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, there are different ways of doing QCs. It's not always QC materials, either from the manufacturers or third party. You can use patient samples as long as you can justify that you can calculate and understand where there's a trend and shift within your QC, so it doesn't impact the patient samples. Fabulous. Victor?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the wonderful presentation. Yeah, so usually the situation we have, or the situation we are faced with, usually is the controls are not, commercial controls are not readily available because of partly because of procurement and also the distance from the manufacturer. Most of the equipment we are using from maybe France, Germany, Japan. So by the time you have, you press an order, by the time you'll be receiving them, they are only maybe, instead of 2 months, like for full blood count, we usually want a 2 months shelf life, but you only have maybe 1 month. So the situation that my colleagues have shared, what Dr. Sa and Madam Kangwas highlighted, is usually what happens in most of the labs. So you won't get value for that control because you just use it maybe for 30 days. And as we are trying to look for another set, in between there, you're going to use the carryover sample. So like for full blood count, we are using 3 levels of controls. Basically, we are following the traditional Westgard rules to accept, but I don't know if there is a little bit of flexibility, if there is another set of rules that we can use, looking at a 3-level kind of controls. The traditional one looks perfect for chemistry, like where they're just the pathological and the normal control. But for hematology, is it okay if you have maybe 2 of the controls okay? They are trending nicely when you put them on the LJ, but one is off. Would you still go ahead and run, or you just want all the 3 to pass? Then the second question is, which other method of trending can we use where carryover samples are concerned? Can we just, because we are just looking at the CV, the coefficient of variation, is there any other way of assessing if they have passed, if the system is okay? Would you suggest any other method? Most labs I've seen they are using 10% coefficient of variation, which may be a very big gap, especially like for red blood cells. Yeah. So that is my concern.
Mm.
Thank you.
Nora, can you answer that question. Number one, the perfect answer, and number two, the pragmatic one for the situation we're
I
in.
don't know if I could.
I'll try. Do your best,
to the
please.
first question, I would say you couldn't accept 2QC because you're looking at different level that would apply to your patient results. So you might be looking at a patient which has a lower value of your hemoglobin, your platelets, and so on. So you need to make sure that results is accurate. So if the QC is not working, you can't guarantee that results is accurate and the other two are working. So a normal patient with normal results, your normal QC is fine. Patients with higher results, your high QC is fine, but your low one is not working, or the other way around. You can't guarantee your patient results are accurate because your QC is not working. So you can't have a situation where you would accept some of your QC and still work with some of them failing and run patient samples. That should not be the case. There should always be a way of assuring, even if it means you go back to your contingency and you test that to assure yourself for those patient with those level of results. So that would be, in my opinion, no, we can't. You wouldn't be able to do that. But there will be other ways you can assure if you don't have a QC, because your QC, sometimes your QC have traveled a long way and the stability is gone. That could impact one QC level. But you have to have another way of assuring the QC, the control, the instruments within control before you run patient samples. With regards to the second questions, because you're running patient samples, you can't really use the live-IgA in the same way of running QC, one lot of QC, the same QC over a period of 30 days or so on, because you're running different patient sample, different day. And Yvonne can come in here in terms of, I think there are labs in which you use patient samples and then you say there's a benchmark based on either written paper or based on even on the Westgard rule or your measurement of certainty, but you have to have an acceptable CV. Acceptable CV of 10 is quite wide, in my opinion, because if you are running, depending on what results you are running, if it's a low value, low end of the results, your hemoglobin or platelets or other parameters, that would be really high. So you would make sure you have some sort of a benchmark of a published data or results from your QC when you did your measurement of certainty, where you're measuring your biological variant of your patient sample you're testing as a QC and comparing it when your analytical data is good. That would be my opinion. I don't know if Siobhan, if you have anything to add.
No, I'm happy with what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, so it is really difficult when you I completely understand now that it's very difficult for you to obtain the materials you need to make sure that you are consistently having the same approach of what is required for patient for analyzing patient samples. So you've got to come up with other ways of making sure you assure the quality of your assays before you run patient samples. And running patient samples is one way. If you don't have it, you just need to make sure you have a benchmark you're measuring yourself as against acceptability. Because I don't know what the CV that you're accepting as 10%, is that across all of the parameters and across all the QCs?
Yes, in most of the labs, but it's 10%. I also seek to understand what maybe Dr. Sa and Kangwa are doing. If they are already applying what you have suggested, like maybe from the manufacturer CV, like from their repeatability or reproducibility experiments, and if they have any reputable literature that they have cited to agree to accept their carryover runs. But your suggestion actually can work. I just want to hear, because a lot of labs are doing carryover samples.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, is that 10% is either historical based on something, but I would say definitely review that because that is going to be wide for some of
It's
the
too wide.
parameters.
And it's all parameters actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no.
It is wide.
Yeah, even 5% is too wide.
Yeah.
It is, I mean, there is a lot of data available at the moment. Even the WestGuard website does have acceptable benchmark of analytical values in which you can look at for your and that compares the biological variance of patient samples to the QC samples you run on instrument. So that would be a good place to look at as well. Of course, there are other data that set benchmarks for our QCs.
Okay. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for all your questions and input. So Nora, we'll have to sort a day for you later in the year. I'll email you later this afternoon. Thank you very, very much.